Welcome to One Work, Five Questions with Donna Vitek and Dr. Mark Holowchak. Today, we're going to talk about Thomas Jefferson's letter to Anne Willing Bingham, dated February 7th, 1787. Thank you for joining us to talk about this letter. I'm very interested in learning more about Thomas Jefferson.
Thank you for having me and little Jefferson here. He always seems to know when
the
we're
real
doing
Jefferson.
this. The only time he seems to jump on my lap is when I'm doing one of these sessions. So
the real Jefferson.
real Jefferson. Well, the one that's alive.
Yeah. Today, we'll be talking about Thomas Jefferson's proper role of women, and he's corresponding with Anne Willing Bingham. Last week, I promised a critical discussion of a letter Jefferson wrote to this American socialite. Dr. Holowchak's attention will be on the letter Jefferson wrote to Bingham on May 11th, 1788. Well, that's what I had requested. He redirected me to an earlier letter, which he said was a better barometer of Jefferson's views on the proper social role of women. So today we discuss that earlier letter written on February 7th, 1787, over a year earlier, in an effort to tease out Thomas Jefferson's thought on the role of women in America or any society. Ooh, I can't wait. I'm very interested to hear because there's so much controversy with Thomas Jefferson's thoughts on everything, it seems. So I'm excited.
You're a woman, so
yes,
you have a vested interest in his views.
Yeah, well, I do, but I think where it becomes difficult for me with the social part is I'm probably more aligned with Thomas Jefferson's thoughts on the proper role of women. But well, let's hear. I can't wait any longer. So let's get started with Dr. Holowchak. Question number one: who was Anne Willing Bingham?
Well, she was a young lady who was married a wealthy husband by the name of William, and she came from a long line of Philadelphians. Her father was Thomas Willig. He was the first president of the first bank of the United States. Her paternal grandfather was Charles Willig, who was the mayor of Philadelphia 2 times. Her paternal grandmother, Anne Shippen, was the granddaughter of Edward Shippen, who was the second mayor of Philadelphia. So she comes from a line of prominent Philadelphians. And I don't recall what her husband William did, but I think he was an international businessman. I'm not sure, but anyway, he's a very, very wealthy man, and she traveled much with him and in Europe, and she stayed in Paris on occasions, and she was much taken by the intellectual, the social climate of Paris, which in many respects, it was a bustle, as we're going to find out from Thomas Jefferson, but it was also sort of, advanced for its social climate vis-a-vis, with respect to women. So, I mean, that's what's going on here. She really loved what the sort of social freedoms that women had in Paris.
Okay, so she was taken with that freedom. And
yeah, and she was very young at the time. I think she was 23 when she's writing Jefferson. That's pretty young.
Yeah, that is very young. Okay, so question number 2. Jefferson begins by contrasting the tranquil pleasures of America to the empty bustle of Paris. To illustrate the latter, he gives us Chez Madame. What does he say?
Well, let me go to this text right here. He talks about Chez Madame, and he's trying to go and give an example of the lifestyle of the average French aristocratic woman. So he talks of Chez Madame, and he misspells Madame, but doesn't put the E. No, he does. He spells it the right way. That's my misreading. He says the curtains are drawn. She gets up at 11. Right, so she's, and Jefferson means that as a slap already, because he's up at the he's always up when the sun's up.
Right.
At least he tells us that, and everybody tells us that. So 11 o'clock, she's up. The curtains are drawn, propped on bolsters and pillows, and her head scratched into a little order. And he says, a little order. And bulletins of the sick are read and the billets of the well. She writes to some of her acquaintance and receives the visits of others. If the morning is not very thronged, i.e. filled with people, she is able to get out and hobble round the cage of the Palais Royal, but she must hobble quickly, for the coiffeur's turn is come, and a tremendous turn it is. So she's got to get her hair done, right? And happy if he does not make her arrive when dinner is half over. The torpitude of digestion a little past. In other words, she's bustling around even before food gets digested. She flutters half an hour through the streets by way of paying visits and then to the spectacles, shows presumably. These finished, another half hour is devoted to dodging in and out of the doors. Look at his wordage, dodging. Doors of her very sincere friends, and away to supper. After supper, cards, and after cards, bed. To rise at noon the next day and to tread like a mill horse, Jefferson uses that phrase quite a bit, the same trodden circle over again. And then he sums, he says, the days of life are consumed, doesn't talk about being lived or enjoyed, they're consumed one by one without an object beyond the present moment, ever flying from the ennui of that, yet carrying it with us eternally in pursuit of happiness, which keeps eternally before us. So she's goes through the same regimen every single day to escape boredom and to pursue pleasure. And in the constant pursuit of escaping ennui, she's completely bored every single day. So she's looking for pleasures, perhaps, you know.
Yeah, it sounds to me like he's saying that the women in Paris are more interested in the superficial pleasures of life than the meaningful pleasures of life.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
that's certainly the picture he paints. It's just like, I have a lot of money and, you know, I'm going to eat when I need to eat. I'm going to go see this, do all the things I'm supposed to do by means of, in his view, is by means of escaping ennui, escaping boredom, but yet wallowing in it while she's trying to escape it. I.e., she doesn't understand, Madame does not understand what a meaningful life is for a woman. And we'll say more on that in a bit.
Okay. Oh, this is great. He unsurprisingly then turns to the life of an American woman. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so he's contrasting the life of a useful life-enhancing activities of an American woman with the stale, meaningless activities of the French, of chez Madame, who's ever trying to escape boredom. It's you know, the American woman, in contrast, doesn't have to escape boredom because she has at every moment meaningful activities. Right? In America, on the other hand, the society of your husband, the fond cares of the children. In other words, a woman must attend to the society of the husband, serve her husband, basically. The fond cares for the children, the arrangements of the house, the improvement of the grounds, fill every moment with a healthy and useful activity. Notice healthy and useful. Every exertion is encouraging because to present amusement, it joins the promise of some good, some future good. The intervals of leisure are filled by the society of real friends whose affections are not thinned to cobweb by being spread over 1,000 objects. So the last line is she has real friends, namely other women who have the same interests, right? Instead of attaching yourself to so many diversions, he would probably say, to pass the time, you know, countless diversions. When you do that, you can't have real friends.
Right.
You know, if you find women who have the same aims and the same thoughts of you in terms of just being, in terms of having a domesticated lifestyle,
Right.
You're going to be happier, because Jefferson always links happiness with usefulness, both for males and females.
Oh, happiness with usefulness. I want to make a note of that. Oh. Well, I think that's an excellent, those are two great words to link together.
He always talks about utility linked with happiness. Virtue and utility. He
Okay.
tells his daughters in numerous letters, we'll get to one at some point, I guess, is that if you want to be happy in life, just be useful. Find meaningful activities. And that's why he says sometimes forget reading novels, because all they do is escapism. It takes you to places that you can't, which you can't go. So they're not healthy. Some novels are, but not all. So, I mean, you need to live in reality.
Right, right. That's interesting. Okay. Question number 4. It's hard not to conclude that Jefferson's observations are essentially political instead of factual. Were they? Was he misogynistic, as he's often accused of being?
Yeah, he's almost always called misogynistic, and we'll get to that in a bit. The first question was, is it political? Yeah, it's political in, I think, a somewhat inoffensive way, in that Jefferson has his Republicanist views of having elected representatives that are recallable, having people watch over them, having people participate in governmental activities to the fullest capacity, of having picking people who are virtuous, not only intelligent, but virtuous. He claims that he wants virtuous people. People are honest and good and caring that are running political affairs. He wants free presses, freedom of religion. This is all part of his political package, and it's hard to disagree with any of it. I mean, it's an investment in the goodness of human beings, all human beings, not just those who have power because they come from money. So yeah, it's political in that sense. But as I always say, Jefferson is insistent that political is always answerable to the moral. So he's got a moral vision, sort of like what Plato had when Plato wrote his Republic millennia ago. And he's literally talking about what is an ideal society like. And, we did 1 word 5 questions in his letter to William Henry Harrison in 1803, where he talks his anti-city sentiments. Cities are bad.
Right.
But what is good? Rural living, farm life. It's healthy. You're working with the soil. You have an attachment to the soil because you work with it. So if there's a war, you're going to fight for what you. It's like what's going on in Ukraine.
To protect your property
for their soil. It's their soil. So you're going to have an attachment to it. So he's got this view of a mostly agrarian lifestyle for all Americans. And it's very much in line with tradition. The ancient Greeks, as a Greek scholar, I used to focus on the ancient Greeks and Romans, and decades ago, and people had always called the Greeks, Plato accepted, because Plato had very advanced views of women. He thought they could be political, they could be soldiers, they could do everything men could do, just a little weaker. The people always say, well, the Greeks were misogynistic. They hated women. And it's so silly. The first way I could show that it just didn't make any sense, go to the museums. When you look at the statues, what do you see? How many male statues? How many female? There's as many female statues as there are male, of prominent women or of female goddesses. The Athens was named after a female goddess, Athena. So women were tremendously important, instead of talking about the perceived female inferiority. And Jefferson falls right into this camp. He's following this long millennia old tradition. Think of it more as a partnership. That males and females need each other. The man, for Jefferson, has a social role. He goes outside and does the political social stuff. The woman, especially in a place like Monticello, has her own activities. She is like, I described this for the Greeks, she's like the foreman of a small factory. She has to direct everything, the cooking, the cleaning, the sewing.
Yeah.
It's a large job, and someone has to do it. And Jefferson, being a traditionalist, thinks, well, women are in some sense biologically inferior, I'll put it that way, because at least they're not as strong, and they're by nature the ones who bring forth children.
Right.
His argument would be biologically, it's the role of a woman to have a domestic, and a lot of women, I think you probably too would agree with that today.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't make you a misogynist if you do.
Yeah, well, what I see is it depends on the perspective of the person evaluating him. Because if you're coming from a feminist perspective, then all you see is he thinks that's all women are good for. That's the perspective they're seeing his speech. I, on the other hand, fulfill a lot of the duties and roles that he believes women ought to fill. And so I see him as having a tremendous respect for women, because he knows this is what we are good at, and
you are best at,
and he thinks we are more than capable of doing this, and doing the jobs that we do. And so I think it depends on who's evaluating his words.
Yeah, I mean, you can come from as we're going to see with Bingham, she's a feminist, early feminist. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
She goes to Paris and she sees women having a social presence, women having a political function, discussing politics of the day and doing it intelligently.
Right.
Jefferson is thinking, well, this is disgusting. Women aren't supposed to do that. So in some sense, you say, Tom, get a clue. Women are as intelligent as men. They can be as political as men if they want to be.
Right.
But he just thinks, given his picture of what a perfect society is very traditional.
Right.
But it also, it's not exclusive. It doesn't hate women. It just sees women having a certain role in the society. Right. And many women of his day, certainly the women of Paris, would laugh at him and think you're just ridiculously conservative, Thomas. Doesn't make him a misogynist.
No, it doesn't.
He's a bit short-sighted, if anything, not seeing what women can do.
I take it, I feel like he has a tremendous amount of respect for the women who choose to fulfill traditional roles. That's how I read his work.
No, that's exactly what's going on. Yeah. I think he has respect for all women. He just sort of doesn't grasp why a woman would want to be political.
Right.
When he sees the Native American women, for example, engaged in farming and doing some very arduous tasks, he just doesn't get it. He thinks, well, the Native Americans don't get it. They don't understand what women are supposed to do. It's the same thing with people in France. There should be attending to the household affairs and things like that, not getting mixed up politically. But again, it doesn't make you a hater. Right. Failure to see that women have certain capacities, the same capacities in many respects that men have, doesn't make you a hater of women. It makes you short-sighted.
Right.
Right. So, and like you said, there are many women today that still agree with Thomas Jefferson, you included, and many don't, and that's fine.
Right.
If you're a hater of women, you're going to dislike women no matter what they do or what roles they do, and certainly he doesn't think. I mean, you're absolutely right to think for Thomas Jefferson, no society can function without the vital input of women.
Right.
Right. So consider it, as I always say to the Greeks, it's a partnership.
Right. Right. Wow. This is, I really hope the younger generation, I hope we get some viewers that are in the younger generation to listen to this discussion today, because it's so important to understand. Oh man, we're down to question 5. I don't want it to be question 5. This is such a great discussion. Bingham replies to Jefferson's letter. What does she say? I was reading the one she wrote in his response, and I didn't go beyond that.
Now, again, I iterate, she's 23. And from what I can gather, this is the only time that she has written to Thomas Jefferson. She replies to his letter. And I'll read from my screen here what I copied down from the letter. She says, the picture you have exhibited is rather overcharged. You have thrown a strong light upon all that is ridiculous in their characters, women's characters, and you have buried their good qualities in the shade. It shall be my task to bring them forward, or at least to attempt it. So right off the bat, you've got a 23-year-old brazen woman putting Jefferson in his place. And at some point, you can hear a lot of women, maybe they're listening to this broadcast later, are going to say, yay, good for her. And yeah, fine. I mean, Jefferson just, he is blind to a lot of what women could do.
Right.
The fact that he thinks women should have a domestic role doesn't necessarily mean that they can't understand political matters, and they can't. He doesn't see that.
Right.
So she writes, French women are more accomplished and understand the intercourse of society better than in any other country. We are irresistibly pleased with them because they possess the happy art of making us pleased with ourselves. Their education is of a higher caste, and by great cultivation, they procure a happy variety of genius just meaning intelligence, which forms their conversation to please either the fop or the philosopher. Isn't that wonderful, the wording? The fop, a person pretending to be knowledgeable, or the philosopher, someone who indeed has a great deal. She said, go back to that because they make us pleased with ourselves, right? Because he's a young woman who realizes that women have many of the same capacities as men. It makes me feel good to see a society that realizes the capacities of women. And then she turns to politics. The women of France interfere in the politics of the country and often decided term to the fate of empires, either by the gentle arts of persuasion or by the commanding force of superior attractions and addresses. They have obtained that rank in consideration in society, which the sex are entitled to, in which they in vain contend for in other countries. And she says, we are therefore bound in gratitude to admire and revere them for asserting our privileges as much as the friends of liberties of mankind reverence the successful struggles of the American patriots. So it's a very strong statement about in Paris, women are liberated.
Right.
She's basically saying, Thomas, the view you have of women in America and their domestic and only domestic role is one that it shackles females, is one that puts them in chains and doesn't recognize their potentials. So, I mean, you brought, I could say more, but I won't, but you also brought it to my attention, the other letter that she writes to, or Jefferson writes to her on May 11. And Jefferson basically says something to the effect, without saying it literally, that, well, you're young, when you have my sort of experience, you'll come to see that what I've said is right. Right. Let's see. It says American women have the good sense to value domestic happiness above all other, and the art to cultivate it beyond all others. There is no part of the earth where so much of this is enjoyed in America. And he says, you agree with me? And he goes on to say, you'll change your opinion, my dear madam, and come over to mine in the end. So it's a subtle suggestion, or even hint that you're young. Yeah, you're entitled to, your loud, youthful opinions based on ignorance and lack of experience with life's eventualities. But in the end, you're going to come to see that, yeah, this is really what it's like. Now, I want to add before we end that Jefferson, not only having a very traditionalist view of the role of women and of the role of men, that men shouldn't be involved in domestic affairs. They should, conversely, we don't think of it that way. Like the man should stay out of household affairs. When
They really should.
running the house, get your butt out of the house. We don't need your input here. I'm running things. I know what's going on. People never look at it that way. That if the woman's role is in the house, the man should just keep his butt out of the house, and not interfere with how it's run, not put in his 2 cents.
Right.
So he's a very strong traditionalist. And again, I don't think that makes him a misogynist in the least. He's a traditionalist and overly conservative. And, if you want to condemn someone from being overly conservative, that's fine. He's guilty and is charged. But again, like a lot of women today, I think will still agree with him, especially more conservative women. But
or even women, because I can tell you from my own experience, when I was her age, I would have agreed before I was ever married and had children. I would have agreed with Miss Bingham. I would have been right by her side, fighting that fight. I was quite the I had quite the feminist attitude. It
Yeah,
wasn't.
and I see from the clock, I got about 6 minutes
Yeah.
to wrap.
Oh,
But I would say I'm in the middle.
yeah.
I'm sympathetic with women who are traditionalists and see that women should have a domestic role, and I'm also sympathetic with women who want something more. You should have more. If you want more, you should have more. And
Right, right. And
we live
respect
in a
one
society
another.
where that's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the important part is supporting all whatever choice a woman makes, support it. If you
Right.
choose to do the traditional role, support that. If you choose to do the career and professional role, support that. Oh, this was such a good discussion, and it's almost like we need 2 episodes for it. Thank you so much, Dr. Holowchak. And I want to let everyone know if his books, the list of his books will be in the description of the video. All of his essays, he's got close to 150 essays on Thomas Jefferson, and numerous published books. So you'll find all that
Here's
in
my
the
scholars, Thomas Jefferson, where you can get some of the writings. You can get the letter to Anne Willing Bingham in there, as well as several others. So
Oh,
throw that in.
great. What a book.
Don't all of you throng right to Amazon to buy the book right at one time, so overload the capacities they have there. But it's a great book.
And if oh, and also, so before we go, let me just give you a teaser for next week. So you maintain that Jefferson's letter to Bingham is inoffensively political because Jefferson, to the best of his abilities, is writing on behalf of his utopian ideals, of his republicanism. Next week, we go into a wholly different direction, a letter by Jefferson to his personal physician, Vine Utley.
Yeah, it's a great letter. It's one of my favorite letters that Jefferson. I think we agreed we're going to switch off every week, and I'll choose one time, you'll choose another. This is my choice. Okay. Utley asks Jefferson, here's my teaser. He asks Jefferson for some information on his physical habits so he can, suggest regimen, course of what he should eat, how he should behave, and so forth. And Jefferson does all that. And of course, Jefferson being Jefferson does a heck of a lot more. He gives him much, much more information and thank goodness he does that, because that's the sort of information that makes my blood course through my veins and arteries much more readily, because he's just, such an amazing, incredible person. And then when you read some of the stuff that he writes in this letter, it's really good stuff. So I invite people to come in. We can learn not only about Jefferson's physical habits, but some of his moral habits. Ooh, people don't like to talk about morality today. Jefferson did.
Oh,
Anyway.
I in one of the future episodes, we're going to, that's why I chose it. One of the former slaves had written a letter to Thomas Jefferson, and he actually told him, talked a little bit about his reputation. So I can't wait.
Banneker?
Yeah, I can't wait to go further into.
There are a couple letters exchanged, I think, and many. Yeah, we'll get to that, and we're going to see that Jefferson's views on Black Americans, or blacks in general, are sort of, I don't want to say ambivalent. He was never ambivalent on that. But yeah, so Benjamin Banneker, yeah, he was a very talented man.
And he thought highly of Thomas Jefferson. So I can't wait we have so many exciting things coming up for everyone. So
and that's what's fun about this. The fun is we're not doing too much. We're biting off a little bit and trying to chew it thoroughly. I hope we are. So,
yes.
we once a week we give you something, and hopefully it's entertaining as well as educational, as well as educative. So yeah, I think I like the format. You and I agreed on this format when we started, and it's a brilliant format, I think, and hopefully it's fun for the viewers.
I do too. Oh, and we have the American West. We have that'll be one of my choices on
Right.
Thomas Jefferson's part in the expansion of America. So
well, we can do that 2 weeks from now.
okay.
I'll get you a nice reading on that. That's really sort of something Jefferson worked on in 1784, I believe.
Oh,
Right, his
wow.
thoughts on American expansionism and so forth, and it's some good stuff. So you picked a really interesting topic.
Well, you have taught me well, Dr. Holowchak. I appreciate the
Thank you
time
for
and
that.
everything you've put into educating America. And this has been such an important project for me, and especially working with you and how we met. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. If you'd like to contact Dr. Holowchak, you can reach him at mholowchak@hotmail.com, or his Facebook page, Thomas Jefferson, Bring Him Home to Monticello, Citizens for Change. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Holowchak.
As usual, thank you for having me, and we look forward to some fun next week. Jefferson's sort of confession in terms of how he lives and what he thinks about. So, see you again. See you next week.
Bye.